There was a time when every factory worker in America carried the exact same things. Not because someone told them to, but because survival on the floor demanded it. By 1972, these items weren't just objects, they were part of who you were. But today, you won't find a single one of them. Not in the plants that are left, not anywhere. The metal lunch pail? Let's start with something you probably remember if you were there. The metal lunch pail. Not a plastic container, not a paper bag. Metal, heavy, dented. And it made a sound when you set it down on the break room table, a sound. Every man on the line knew. Inside, a sandwich your wife made before sunrise. Maybe bologna, maybe leftover meatloaf. A thermos of coffee that had to last 8 hours. An apple, if you were lucky. But here's what people forget. That lunch pail wasn't just about food, the ritual. It was about the ritual. You grabbed it on your way out the door at 5 a.m. You set it in your locker when you clocked in. You waited for the whistle. And when break time came, you opened it slowly because that's when the shift paused. That's when you could breathe. The lunch pail marked time. It divided your day, morning, lunch, dinner, break. If you pulled a double, it was a clock you could hold. Today, workers eat out of vending machines, or they skip lunch altogether. The ritual, gone. But in 1972, if you didn't have that metal pail, you weren't really part of the crew. The punch card. Now let's talk about something even more important. The punch card. Every worker had one. A stiff piece of cardboard with your name stamped on it and rows of blank spaces waiting to be punched. You walked up to the time clock at the start of your shift. You slid that card into the slot. The machine made a loud clunk, and just like that, your time started. Your pay started. Your life for the next 8 hours started. Missing that punch, that could cost you. Being late, the foreman noticed. The card didn't lie, and here's something that might surprise you. That punch card wasn't just a timekeeper. It was proof. Proof you showed up. Proof you worked. Proof you earned what you were owed. The end of the card today? It's all digital. Swipe a badge. Scan your finger. Log into a computer. But back then, you held your hours in your hand. At the end of the week, you could see every single shift you worked stamped right there in black ink. When the plant closed on Friday, you'd pull that card one last time, and you knew payday was coming. There was something honest about it, something solid. You worked. The card proved it. You got paid. But that system, it disappeared decades ago. The time clocks were scrapped. The cards were thrown out. And with them, a small piece of dignity went to the thermos. Let's move to something you might still have in your garage. The thermos. But not the kind they make now. I'm talking about the heavy glass-lined thermos that could keep coffee hot for 10 hours straight. Every factory worker had one in 1972, and I mean every one. It didn't matter if you worked the day shift or the graveyard. That thermos was non-negotiable. You filled it at home before the sun came up. You packed it in your lunch pail. And when you unscrewed that cap during break, the steam rose up like a small miracle. Hot coffee in the middle of a cold plant, in the middle of a long shift, in the middle of a hard life. Here's the thing. You couldn't just run to a coffee shop back then. There were no Starbucks on every corner. If you wanted hot coffee at 2 a.m. on the line, you brought it yourself. And that thermos, it lasted. Some men used the same one for 20 years. Dented, scratched, but it still worked because it was built to work. The shared cup there was another thing about the thermos. Sometimes you'd share. A guy forgot his, you'd pour him a cup. A new kid on his first week. Someone handed him coffee without asking. It wasn't charity, it was just how things worked. You looked out for each other, because the work was hard, the hours were long, and the only thing that got you through was knowing the man next to you was in it too. Today, everyone buys their own coffee, individual cups, individual everything. But in 1972, that thermos was a small act of brotherhood, poured quietly, shared without ceremony, and never forgotten. The work gloves. Now, let's talk about the gloves. Not the thin disposable kind. I'm talking about thick leather work gloves. Stiff when you first bought them, but after a few weeks, they molded to your hands. They became part of you. Every factory worker had a pair in 1972, and you didn't just use them, you lived in them, picking up hot metal. Gripping tools, protecting your hands from cuts, burns, splinters. Here's what you need to understand. Your hands were your livelihood. If your hands got injured, you couldn't work. And if you couldn't work, your family didn't eat. So those gloves weren't optional. They were survival. You kept them in your back pocket, or tucked into your belt, or hanging from your locker. And when your shift started, putting them on was like putting on armor. You were ready. But the gloves wore out. The leather cracked, the seams split. And when they finally gave out, you bought another pair. Same style, same brand, because you knew what worked. Today, most factory jobs don't even require gloves like that anymore. Machines do the heavy work, robots do the dangerous work. But back in 1972, your hands did everything. And those gloves were the only thing standing between you and the hospital. The locker key here's a small thing that mattered more than you'd think. The locker key. A little brass key on a simple ring. Nothing fancy, but every worker had one. Your locker was your space. Your only space in the whole plant. That's where you kept your lunch pail, your thermos, your spare gloves, your jacket, maybe a photo of your kids. When you clocked in, you unlocked that locker. When you clocked out, you locked it again. And that key stayed with you, in your pocket, on your keychain. Always close. Because here's the truth. That locker wasn't just storage. It was a small piece of privacy, a small piece of dignity in a loud, dirty, dangerous plant. That locker was yours, and nobody touched it. The lost lockers today, a lot of plants don't even have lockers anymore. Workers share spaces, or they keep everything in their cars. But in 1972, that locker was sacred. Your name was on it. Your shift depended on it. And that little brass key was one of the most important things you owned. Lose that key, you had to find the foreman, get a replacement, deal with the hassle, so you didn't lose it, ever. It's funny how something so small could mean so much. But when you worked in a factory in 1972, small things kept you steady. Small routines, small possessions, they made the chaos manageable. And that locker key, it was one of them. The safety goggles. Let's talk about safety. In 1972, every factory worker had a pair of safety goggles. Clear plastic, scratched to hell, uncomfortable. But you wore them anyway, because the foreman checked, and if you weren't wearing them, you got sent home. No pay, no argument. The rules were simple. Protect your eyes or lose your job. Here's the thing. Those goggles fogged up in the heat. They pinched your nose. They left marks on your face. But they also saved lives. Metal shavings flying, sparks from welding, chemical splashes. Your eyes were always at risk. So you kept those goggles in your locker. You cleaned them with your shirt. And you put them on every single day. Not because you wanted to, but because you had to. Today, safety standards are better. Equipment is better. But back then, those goggles were all you had. And every man who worked the floor knew someone who'd been injured. Someone who didn't wear their goggles. Someone who paid the price. So you wore them, and you didn't complain. The pay envelope. Here's something you definitely won't find today. The pay envelope. Every Friday, the foreman handed them out. Small manila envelopes, your name written on the front. Cash inside, not a check, not a direct deposit. Cash, bills, you could hold, count, take home. You opened that envelope carefully. You counted every dollar, and then you gave most of it to your wife, because she managed the house. The bills, the groceries, the kids, but you kept a little. Maybe $5, maybe $10. Enough for a beer on Friday night. Enough to feel like a man who worked hard and earned something. Payday respect. That pay envelope meant something. It meant respect. It meant your time was worth something. Your labor was worth something. And when you handed it to your wife, she knew you'd done your part. Today, money moves invisibly. Numbers on a screen. Automatic transfers. But in 1972, you held your pay in your hands. You felt its weight. You saw what a week of your life was worth. And when that envelope was empty, you knew it was time to go back to work. Time to earn another one. That's gone now. Completely gone. And with it, a certain kind of tangible pride. The work jacket. Every factory worker in 1972 had a jacket. Not a nice jacket, not a clean jacket, a work jacket, stained with oil, smelling like metal and sweat. Pockets full of pens, small tools, scraps of paper. You wore that jacket every single day. In winter, it kept you warm. In summer, you tied it around your waist. But you always had it, because the plant was cold. The machines were cold, and the work never stopped. That jacket told a story. The burn mark from a spark. The torn pocket from catching on equipment. The faded name patch your wife sewed on. Every mark was a memory. And here's the thing. You didn't wash that jacket often. Maybe once a month, because washing it meant losing a day of work and you couldn't afford that. So it stayed dirty. It stayed worn. and it stayed with you. Today, workers wear uniforms provided by the company. Clean, identical, replaceable. But in 1972, your jacket was yours. It fit you. It smelled like you. It was part of your identity. When you hung it up at the end of your shift, you were hanging up the day. When you put it on in the morning, you were putting on the work. The cigarettes? Let's be honest. In 1972, almost every factory worker had a pack of cigarettes. Marlboro, Camel, Lucky Strike, tucked in a shirt pocket or rolled up in a sleeve. Smoking wasn't just allowed, it was expected. Break time. Everyone lit up. Lunch. Cigarettes. After a tough shift, cigarettes. It wasn't about health. Nobody talked about that. It was about the break, the pause. The moment you could step outside, light up, and just breathe, you shared them too. A guy ran out. You handed him one. No questions asked. That cigarette was currency. It was friendship. It was survival. The smoke break culture today, smoking is banned in most plants. And honestly, that's probably for the best. But something was lost to that culture of the smoke break. That moment when the line stopped and men became human again. You stood outside in the cold, or in the summer heat, and you talked. About the job, about the game, about nothing. And for 5 minutes, the work didn't own you. Those cigarettes, they're gone now. But the need for that pause, that hasn't changed. People just don't have the ritual anymore. The small notebook, here's something you might not expect. A lot of factory workers in 1972 carried a small notebook, just a cheap little spiral notebook, pocket-sized, pages filled with numbers, notes, reminders, production numbers, machine settings, shift changes. Things you had to remember, things the foreman told you, things that kept you from making mistakes, because mistakes cost money. Mistakes got you yelled at, mistakes could get you fired, so you wrote things down. In that little notebook, and you kept it in your chest pocket, right next to your cigarettes. It wasn't fancy, the pages got greasy, the cover bent, but it worked. And when a new guy asked you how to do something, you pulled out that notebook and showed him. That notebook was your second brain, your backup, your insurance policy. Today, people use phones, apps, digital notes, but in 1972, that little notebook was your lifeline, and every worker who lasted more than a year had one. The work boots, let's talk about the boots. Steel-toed work boots, heavy, stiff, uncomfortable for the first month, but after that, they fit like they were made for you. Every factory worker had a pair in 1972, and you didn't cheap out on boots, because your feet carried you through 12-hour shifts, through oil spills, through metal shavings, through whatever the floor threw at you. A good pair of boots lasted 2 years, maybe 3 if you took care of them, and when they finally wore out, you bought the same brand again, same size, same style, because you knew they worked. Your boots got you to work. They protected you at work, and they got you home. That was the job, and they did it. The boot ritual, here's something else. You never wore your work boots inside the house, ever. You left them by the door, because they carried the factory with them. The dirt, the oil, the smell. Your wife didn't have to tell you. You just knew. Those boots stayed outside. And when you put them on in the morning, you were stepping back into that world. Today, people wear sneakers to work, comfortable shoes, light shoes, but in 1972, your boots were armor, and you treated them that way. The union card. One more thing. If you worked in a union plant in 1972, and most where you had a union card, a small laminated card with your name and your union number. You kept it in your wallet, right next to your driver's license, because that card mattered. It meant you were protected. It meant you had a voice. It meant you weren't alone. When the union met, you showed that card. When there was a vote, that card got you in the door. And when there was trouble, that card meant someone had your back. Today, union membership is a fraction of what it was. A lot of plants aren't union at all, but in 1972, that card was power. Small power, but real. So there you have it. The things every factory worker had in 1972, the metal lunch pail, the punch card, the thermos, the gloves, the locker key, the goggles, the pay envelope, the jacket, the cigarettes, the notebook, the boots, the union card. None of them were fancy. None of them were expensive. But together, they told a story. A story of men who worked hard, who showed up, who survived. And today, you won't find a single one of them. Not in the plants that are left. Not anywhere. The world moved on. Technology changed, the work changed, but something was lost. 2. If you were there, you know exactly what I mean. And if you weren't, well, now you know what it was like.